Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the American Constitution Society, we'd like to welcome you. Our speaker today is a former Reagan White House appointee to the Commerce Department, who later became the regional political director for the National Rifle Association during their rise to power in the 80s. During the 90s, he headed up the National Firearm Industries Association. He was the chief lobbyist and worldwide spokesman for the past 7 years. He has run a public relations, lobbying, and speaking business called MLS Communications in Ringe, New Hampshire. And his new book, Ricochet, Confessions of a Gun Lobbyist, has sold over 35,000 copies. He's here to share some thoughts about firearm policy, political action, citizen involvement, and the role of the American gun lobby in electoral politics, past, present, and future. Please join me in welcoming Richard Feldman.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning. You know, there are three kinds of people in the world. There are people who make things happen, there are people who watch things happen, and there are people who wake up every single day and say, what happened? Well, by virtue of the fact that you're here today, you're certainly the kind of people that are interested in making things happen. Perhaps the role of firearms is one of the most misunderstood issues of our time. I've never met anyone that doesn't have an opinion on the gun issue. But what people think they're talking about and what's really going on behind the scenes on this issue are almost always very different things. When I was growing up in New York, I wasn't exposed to guns. We didn't have one in the house. I wasn't a hunter. I had shot in the summer in junior riflery, and I came to the conclusion that I was for gun control because I made the mistake that millions of people in this country make all the time of equating gun control to crime control. The two have little or nothing to do with one another. And as I represented the firearms issue as the regional director for the National Rifle Association and later for 10 years running the Firearm Industries Trade Association, I came to recognize that in this debate, the two sides, they're not even yelling at each other, let alone talking to each other. They're talking right past each other. We use terms to describe the issues that we're thinking of different things going on. Certainly one that's been an ongoing issue for the last 15 years is the so-called assault weapons issue. Well, back in '94, when the Congress passed the semi-automatic assault weapons issue, calling an assault weapon a semi-automatic is like saying, well, I have a two-wheeled car or I have a four-wheeled motorcycle. Wait a minute, by definition, motorcycles have two wheels and cars have four. So all of a sudden, something's going on with this issue. And people that don't know firearms can look at a so-called assault weapon, and after all, what makes it an assault weapon in their mind? They say, I don't know how to define it, but I know one when I see one. And I say, well, okay, help me out here. Here we have two automobiles. One's a VW Bug, and the other's a Maserati. Now, we've switched the engines in the two vehicles. Which one's a sports car? What makes a sports car a sports car? Is it the way it looks? Well, clearly, if it's the way it looks, the Maserati's a sports car and the VW Bug is not. Or is it what it's capable of doing? Well, if it's based on its capabilities, the VW Bug with that Maserati engine is just going to be a rocket. And the Maserati might do 0 to 40 in about a minute and a half. So a lot of the debate really depends on how you define terms. What the terms really mean and what you're trying to accomplish. And what I think I've learned in 30 years in American politics is that, unfortunately for all of us as Americans, many of our politicians, most of our politicians, really don't care about the issues. What they care about is getting reelected. And on an issue like guns, which is the third rail in American politics, you have to be very careful, depending on where you come from, how you articulate the issue. Now, there are politicians on both sides, and there are politicians that think if they talk about the gun issue, and one is very close to you here, just over in the state line in Pennsylvania, Governor Rendell. I know Governor Rendell when he was mayor of Philadelphia. And at the time, about 10, 11, 12 years ago, he reached out to me and my group, and he said that he'd like to meet with us. And I flew up to Philadelphia, met with him, and he sits down at the table with us, and he says, you people, the industry, you're putting out these guns, and you're advocating that criminals use the guns. And I said to him, Mayor, I'm lost. What in God's name are you talking about? So he says, well, your people advertise that these guns are fingerprint resistant. I knew exactly where he was coming from, and I said, Mayor, if you had the ad in front of you, you would say that that's not what the ad says, and as poorly written as it may have been, that's not the meaning. And he says, you're wrong, and I have the ad. He runs out to his office, and he comes back, throws it down on the table, and he says, wow, in context, you're right. What the ad said was that one of the advantages, and then he was talking about the Intratec Tech 9, which was sort of the gun that made Miami rock. It was the gun that was shown in Miami Vice all the time, and it was one of the handguns that was banned in that 94 Act because it met this definition. It had a forward magazine. It had a threaded barrel. It had, some of the versions had a flash suppressor. So everyone said, well, it's an assault pistol. I said, well, wait a minute. It's a 9mm pistol. It fires 9mm cartridges. Each time you pull the trigger, it fires one round. How is this an assault weapon? Well, it's a mean, nasty, ugly gun, and it ought not be out there. And I go, so you want to ban it because it's concealable, because it's the bulkiest, most ridiculous pistol I ever saw, and I own several of them. And I remember at the time saying to reporters, well, gee, this is really great. We're going to ban this gun. And I certainly don't know any criminals that would, say, take a Glock or a SIG or a Smith & Wesson and misuse them to commit a crime. They were dedicated to using the gun that was on Miami Vice. Furthermore, when you knew something about the technology of the issue, a Tech 9 is so poorly manufactured, about 1 out of every 20 rounds will jam. So I would say to the police at the time, so help me out here, Chief. You want to ban this gun because it looks ugly. What is your ultimate goal? Do you want your officers on the street to meet up with criminals that are carrying well-manufactured, quality weapons that function every time? Or given the choice, would you like the bad guys to have guns that misfire half the time? What's the bottom line? So as you get into the depth of the issue, some of the outcome changes because as you play out what's really going on, it changes your orientation. What are we trying to do in this country on the gun issue? And what I found, and to my even continuing amazement, when I meet people, and because of the book, I found that folks really on the other side, from handgun control and the gun ban groups, they think because I've, made some criticisms about the way the NRA is run, and for purposes of honesty here, let me say that I'm still a very proud NRA endowment member. I support what the NRA stands for, policy-wise, for the most part, even if I disagree with the way the current leadership has run the organization. That's a separate issue. So I say to these people who I think of as my opponents in this fight, we start talking, and I find, because they'll talk to me because I'm okay now, that we're really so much closer on the issue when we define the issue as how do we get guns out of the hands of people that we all agree ought not have them? And once we redefine the issue that way, we're not talking about these black guns and assault weapons, which they're not, and we're not talking about Saturday night specials, which I never understood what that was all about anyway. And we start focusing on the problem, we find that our disagreements pale in comparison to our agreement on the bottom line. When I was meeting and co-hosted the U.S. Conference of Mayors Gun Task Force with then Mayor Rendell, I was at a meeting with him in Reno, Nevada, and he's pushing me to, we're going to solve the problem with gangbangers getting guns by instituting a one-gun-a-month policy. It's also an issue that still gets some currency. I think New Jersey is still talking about it. And I said, I'm confused again here. What is this supposed to solve? He goes, well, we're going to prevent these gangbangers from going out and buying large quantities of guns at gun shops. I go, wait a minute. We're now in a post-Brady environment. When you go into a licensed dealer to buy a gun, they all run a NICS background check, and if you have a felony conviction and some other things that would prevent you from buying the gun, they will not transfer the gun. They are prevented from doing so. Well, that's not how gangbangers purchase guns. And I'm sitting there with the mayor, and he's got his chief of police next to him, and I'm going, don't these guys even talk to each other once in a while about what's really going on in the streets of Philadelphia? Gangbangers don't buy guns by going into gun shops. They'll send the girlfriend into the gun shop. She doesn't have a criminal history record, and she can buy the guns. And typically, she might buy 5 or 6 guns at a time. But what neither the mayor seemed to know, and certainly the gangbangers didn't know, is that when you buy 2 or more handguns at a gun shop, the gun shop operator is obligated to send a multiple sales form. One goes to the chief law enforcement officer of the county where the shop's located, and another goes, right here as a matter of fact, Falling Waters, West Virginia, to the ATF's tracing center. According to everyone I have ever dealt with at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, they've said the same thing. The single most important investigative lead we have at the agency on gun running is the multiple sales form. It's like a red flag. So-and-so just bought 15 Lortzen pistols. Well, that's unusual. That's not exactly a collectible item. Why would they be doing that? So when you go to a one-gun-a-month environment, what you've actually done is eliminate the multiple sales form, the single most important investigative lead law enforcement has in gun running. Okay, if you solved a problem, there may be some cost benefits there, some obvious ones. But how do you solve the problem? Now you've made it marginally more difficult for a criminal enterprise to obtain guns from legal sources, which is not the typical way they obtain guns in the first place. But if you wanted to, now you can't send your girlfriend out to buy 12 pistols. You send 12 of the girls out, and they each buy 1 pistol. You have the same guns, and when one gun is found at a crime scene, guess what? There's no red flag because it wasn't bought in a multiple sales purchase. It was an individual gun. There's no alert that there are 11 other guns bought contemporaneously with this one that are almost certainly in the possession of that gang. What in God's name have we solved? But I've concluded, unfortunately, that most politicians on both sides of the issue really don't care about the underlying policy considerations, because this is a great issue. If you're holding a news conference at City Hall in Philadelphia, or most places, you're going to get your local TV cameras to come cover it, because it's a good visual. You bring out all the guns from the gun vault, and you have them all lined up there, and people who don't know guns go, oh, this is terrible when bad guys have them. And you know what? They're right. It is terrible. But we don't focus on the problem. We don't even define the problem in this country. The problem isn't guns. The problem is guns in the hands of people who shouldn't have them. And when you make that little shift and you focus on the problem people instead of the gun, you've gone a long way to zeroing in on what we can do that would be effective at keeping guns out of the hands of those who we all agree ought not have them. Now, some groups out there will say, well, this group should and that group shouldn't. On the margins, there can be some disagreement. But even with the most ardent supporters of the Second Amendment, I've never heard any of them say that, yeah, it's okay if convicted violent predatory criminals could lawfully purchase guns. They're not for that. So what in God's name are we arguing over in this country instead of moving the country forward on this issue? Well, when I was ousted from my position at the American Shooting Sports Council, I thought at the time it had to do with the fact that I had negotiated with Rahm Emanuel and Bill Clinton a child safety lock agreement. And that annoyed the National Rifle Association. And I was a little lost. I mean, I knew they didn't like it. But it seemed to me that they really didn't care that much about it. And over time, I came to realize it wasn't the policy that I opposed and cutting the deal with the White House on that, because it was going to be done anyway, with or without our agreement. Congress was fixing to mandate it, and I was very concerned that Congress, not knowing what the heck they're talking about, was going to mandate that the dealer provide this locking device. And I'm going, that's just lawsuits waiting to happen. It should be the manufacturer of the firearm that decides what's the appropriate safety device that should be sold with that gun, and they should provide it. I came to realize, after contemplating the issue, it wasn't about the policy. I was challenging NRA's hegemony over dictating terms on the gun issue. Not that they really disagreed terribly with the policy, but I had ruined something that at the time just sort of never came into my mind: fundraising. The NRA, when I came to NRA in the early 80s, well, the NRA itself is an old institution founded in 1871. The political arm of NRA, the Institute for Legislative Action, was only founded in 1975, and it really wasn't until the early 80s that the political arm, the Institute, really came into its own and started to have a true impact on American politics, from absolutely, local town races, judgeships in states that elect judges, right all the way up to the presidency. And we certainly don't have to look back very far to see where this issue had an impact. I mean, everyone talks about the 2000 election, and clearly West Virginia was one of the 4 states that the gun issue played a seminal role in determining the outcome. Had it gone the other way in West Virginia, Al Gore would have been president of the United States, not George Bush. Had Al Gore won his home state of Tennessee, had he won Florida, and had he won Arkansas, all 4 very close states he should have won, and absent the gun issue, would have won. Very few commentators have looked at the election 4 years ago. You're not very far from Ohio. Bush beat Gore in Ohio by 120,000 votes. A shift of 61,000 votes in Ohio, Gore would have won Ohio. Kerry would have won Ohio. Would have lost the popular vote, but he would have won the Electoral College. The gun vote in Ohio was worth a minimum of 400,000 votes to Bush. So there's twice that the gun issue played into presidential politics. Other commentators, and most notably Bill Clinton himself, suggested strongly that the change in the Congress in 1994 and the Republicans' capture of the House for the first time in 50 years was due to the gun issue. And I was running the association at the time, and I remember very distinctly in 93 and 94 as the Brady bill was going through both the House and the Senate, and then the assault weapons legislation. I remember being in the well of the House of Representatives in August of 1994 when it was first defeated. No one could believe it. But 12 days later, they passed the bill when they padded it up with a lot more money going all over the place. And that next day, after that bill passed in late August of 1994, there were lines around every gun shop, at least in Georgia, where I lived, and plenty of other communities around this country. People feeling, get them while you can, because they won't be around after this law takes effect. And there was a buying frenzy in 94 that was never rivaled until probably this past fall, with people fearful of being able to buy guns that they wanted if they might not be available in the future. And I remember so distinctly in Smyrna, Georgia, just a suburb of Atlanta, at one gun shop, Adventure Outdoors. I went over there that day, and there were lines. There were hundreds of people around the store lined up to come in and buy guns. Well, Bob Barr, who just ran for Libertarian Party president, was running in his first election for Congress. No one gave Bob Barr, including myself, much of a chance of beating the incumbent that year until that vote. His campaign took off, and this is 3 weeks before the contract with America. It was the assault weapons legislation passed by Congress. And all of a sudden, his campaign had an infusion of volunteers, an infusion of money. His people were there at the gun shop, signing up volunteers and workers. And he beat the incumbent that year, very close election, and then went on to win 4 more times after that. That was repeated in district after district in this country, and absent the gun issue, the Democrats would have lost some votes in the House, no question about it. They would not have lost control of the House, let alone the Speaker of the House was defeated. First time in about 100 years that an incumbent Speaker lost his House seat, clearly, unequivocally, because of the gun issue. So the gun issue plays a very strong and powerful role in American politics. And it has not always played that role. And people, especially people who don't own guns and look at it as, I don't get it. I don't understand why this issue is so powerful. What they don't realize, and as a student of politics, it is critical for you to understand, is not what you think, but how the opposition thinks, your opposition, if you will. Why do gun owners view this issue so strongly? Now, there are close to or around 100 million firearm owners in this country. About 42% of all households in America have a firearm in them. I'm sure the number in West Virginia is probably closer to 60 or 70%. In my community of Rindge, New Hampshire, there are 2,000 adult citizens in my community. There are 684 concealed carry licenses amongst 2,000 citizens. I would be willing to bet that 90% of the households where I live have a gun in them. There are no home invasions in Rindge, New Hampshire. They're precious few in West Virginia. If I were going to invade someone's home, I would pick a place like Manhattan. The chance of running into an armed citizen in Manhattan is pretty low. The chance in my community of, when I'm on the road, you walk into my house and my wife will greet you with a .38 revolver. If she doesn't have time, and if she does have time, she'll greet you with a Mini 14 in .223. I would not enter my own house without letting you know I'm coming home. In Europe, there are far more home invasions than here in America. The violent kind of crime that we all worry about, the most common form of violent crime is a street robbery, a mugging. Well, that's the least likely place that if you are a gun owner, you're going to have a gun. Most people keep it at home. They're not carrying a gun. So the whole move in the late 80s and into the 90s and continues has been on concealed carry legislation. And I remember the first state that really changed their laws was Florida. And if you look back at the newspaper reports, there would be blood running in the streets. This will be like the Old West. Actually, the Old West was a pretty calm place relative to today. Everybody had guns. Nobody got too far out of control. And, of course, it never happened. Florida didn't become some Wild West place. And as many other states have changed their gun laws and allow citizens who are not prohibited individuals from owning the guns, to be able to lawfully carry the guns. There have been instance after instance of citizens using the guns to lawfully, properly protect themselves. You know, up until the Heller decision last year in the Supreme Court, I would always get asked about the Second Amendment. You know, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What does it mean? I'd say it means whatever the court says it means. I don't know. Well, now I do know because the court has said what it means. But before that, I said, you know what? What if there was no Second Amendment? Would I be able to own a gun? To my knowledge, no one has ever disagreed with the principle that you have an inalienable right to life and liberty. Not a privilege, a right. Of what value is a right if you are effectively denied the means to enforce that right? And if you're confronted with a couple of knife-wielding muggers on the street and you are legally prevented from having the means, a gun, to protect yourself from them, you really don't have that inalienable right to life or liberty if those punks can take that right away from you or take your life from you. So I never had to rely on the Second Amendment to be able to argue the same thing that I can now argue much more easily and forcefully today in a post-Heller environment. What's interesting about Heller is just how hard the National Rifle Association fought to prevent that case from going to the Supreme Court. It wasn't really in their interest to have the court clearly say that you have a right to own a gun for self-protection, because that has just eliminated a whole slew of fundraisers for NRA. So during the past 8 years of the Bush administration, when there was no great threat on the gun issue to NRA, they had to make up issues to keep the membership kind of pumped up. And after all, you can't let them, go away and go, hey, we've won, thanks ever so much, we're disbanding the organization. Now, the organization does a lot of other things besides the politics and the legislation, but the thing that gives them the credibility and the strength is in the political and legislative arena. And what I much as say in the book and I'm saying to you today is the current NRA leadership would rather fight than win. Because fighting is very good for membership recruitment. I guarantee you the NRA has picked up at least 500,000 members since last summer. They have gone after Barack Obama as the most anti-gun president in America. Of course, to NRA, the next president, whoever he is always going to be the most anti-gun president in America. And they're not really in the mode of necessarily wanting to make friends and influence people, but they're not stupid. A lot of people think, what NRA does doesn't make any sense. Why are they doing this? What they're doing makes a tremendous amount of sense, but they're not working off the same playbook as you and I. What they're doing is raising money. What they're doing is building membership. And when you pay the CEO $1 million a year and fly him around in a private jet wherever he goes, you got to raise a lot of money. That's about 35,000 members have to come in to pay his one salary. Okay, that's fine. They're a private organization, non-profit membership organization. He is the best paid CEO of any non-profit membership organization in this country. What I found amazing when I was writing the book is when I talked to, I knew at the time, most of the NRA board members, 76 of them. If you like to run a board of directors with 76 people. And I'd say, Wayne's making an obscene amount of money. It's not going to protect my rights as a member. They'd go, what are you talking about? I mean, he's making a couple $100,000. And this is to a board member of the organization that's paying him. And I go, no, he's making a lot more than, oh, Richard, you're wrong. I wouldn't say that, you'll get sued. So I expected when my book came out that if I had anything in this book that was wrong, I was going to get sued. If I said that something occurred on a Tuesday and it happened on a Wednesday, I know what I would have done if the roles were reversed and I was at NRA, because I would do this when I was there. I'd go through it and go, it happened on a Wednesday. He said it's a Tuesday. Here's our response. How can you believe anything this guy says? He can't even get the days of the week right. So if he says it was Tuesday and it was Wednesday, the credibility of anything else he says is really kind of shot. So I held my breath when the book came out, because I figured I had to have something like that wrong in the book. And the best that NRA could say when the media called them up was, we don't comment on works of fiction. As I said to the group last night, when I heard that, I go, excellent. You don't say that to somebody like me. So when they'd ask me, well, this is NRA's response to the book, Mr. Feldman, what do you say? Well, perhaps the Internal Revenue Service would be interested in learning that their filings are works of fiction. Even more interestingly, the Federal Election Commission, no doubt, would be fascinated to learn that their filings are works of fiction. Now, I went through their federal election returns very carefully, and to my amazement, I found that their $1 million CEO, since he became executive vice president of NRA in 1991, the same day I took the job with the industry, had never contributed a reportable contribution to NRA's own political victory fund. Not even one. So the message was, do as I say, not as I do. And that, in essence, is kind of what NRA these days is about. It's the way they run their organization, in my judgment. Isn't primarily to benefit the membership. It's primarily to benefit their own pockets. Secondarily, they do a lot of things, I think, that do benefit the membership, but that's not any longer, in my view, their primary goal. And I certainly do disagree with some of the issues and the way they take them. I think they do it for the fundraising opportunities, not for the policy considerations. But having said that, I think it'd be kind of interesting at this time if we really open it up more to your questions. And I'd like to hopefully address them, whether it's on lobbying or any aspect of the gun issue. I'd be very happy to take any of your questions. Now, how are we arranging this? Do we have somebody with a mic out? Great.
First and foremost, I want to say thank you for coming to WU. It's a great honor to have you. I just wanted to get your views on the gun control issue in terms of federal buildings and university settings.
Let's start with the latter, universities. Certainly after the events at Virginia Tech, it was a very hot issue. Should students be allowed that have concealed carry licenses carry guns on campus? I think it's a very tough issue. My initial reaction was thinking back to my own undergraduate days, and I'm thinking that, I just didn't have the maturity level to have a gun. I was spending a little too much time at the local tavern and ending up on campus, and that's probably not a great idea. But on the other hand, what about the professors? I mean, there are plenty of professors, I'm sure, here on campus that have concealed carry licenses, and I'll assume there's a prohibition on campus from having a gun. That's a little different situation. I live right next door to Franklin Pierce University, small liberal arts college in Rindge, New Hampshire, about 2,500 students. They have the same policy, not allowed to have a gun on campus. Now, they actually teach and issue a degree in criminal justice. Well, one of the people that teaches some of their criminal justice classes is the chief of police in the next town, Jaffrey, New Hampshire. So when the police chief from Jaffrey goes to teach a class, first he has to go to the safety department on campus and check his Glock 40 caliber pistol with the safety officers who do not carry guns to go onto campus in uniform and teach a class. Now, if this isn't the most asinine thing I've ever heard, now, is an incident likely to happen at that school? No. Any more than an incident is likely to happen at this school. Any more than you are likely to be mugged today walking the streets of Morgantown. To which I say, the reason there are fire extinguishers all over this campus is not because people are expecting to have a fire today. You want to have the tool necessary in case you did have a fire to put it out with minimum damage. To me, when people say, well, why do you carry a gun? Are you expecting to use it today? Heck no. If I was expecting to use it, I'd have a shotgun and 3 guns on me that day. And when I was a cop, probably did have a couple of guns on me. But when I do carry a gun, it's not because I'm an aggressive person. In fact, quite the opposite. When I carry a gun, I can be an obnoxious person. You can probably tell. When I have a gun and somebody, pushes me the wrong way, I'm sorry, my mistake. They push me again. I'm out of there because I know how that altercation is going to end up. And I really don't want to spend the next 6 weeks explaining before a grand jury why I used the gun in that situation. I'm gone. If I don't have the gun with me, I'll push them right back. Get out of my face. So, of course, that's me. But, the point is, and I did used to carry a gun all the time when I lived in Georgia and Florida. And I did, in fact, have 2 instances where I used the gun. Again, notice the language. I used the gun. Did I fire the gun? No. 9 out of 10 times when you pull a gun, you never have to fire it. The threat of force is so overwhelming, I don't know very many people that will keep coming at me when I point a gun at them. There is that 1 out of 10, and you best be prepared to use it if they come at you. And I did have an altercation on I-95 in Boca Raton. Some road rage, and I finally pulled off the road. And this guy pulled off the road 15, 20 years ago. He pulls off the road, backs his car up to my car, and go, well, I've now withdrawn to where it's no longer safe. I'm not going to drive backwards on I-95, so I'm going to hold my ground. He gets out of his car with a tire iron. He starts walking over to my car. I had a .38 revolver on my leg. I pulled it out, opened the window, pointed it at him, said, you got a problem, bud? Drops the tire iron and says, sorry, my mistake. Well, to this day, that tire iron sits under the passenger seat of one of my vehicles as a reminder. He wasn't injured. I wasn't injured. His car wasn't damaged. My car wasn't damaged. Did the gun work as promised? You bet it did. Now, that's just one incident, but often when people say, well, did you use a gun, what they mean is, did you fire the gun? My mother lives in Palm Beach, Florida, at the PGA National. She lives alone in a double-gated community. She sleeps with a .38 under her pillow. I wish she would put it in a holster. Houses make noises. My mother's 82 years old now. She knows how to shoot. She hears a noise in the house. You don't dial 911 every time you hear a noise and something suspicious. Actually, a frog did get into the bathroom a couple years ago and she heard it flopping around. She took the gun out looking for it, saw it was a frog, and put it away. But I said, Mom, you live alone. If you encounter someone moving in that house, shoot them. Don't unload the revolver, reload, then turn the lights on, call 911, because, the old story, if you call Domino's and 911, who's going to show up first? Well, the police can't be there. In fact, as a former cop, the thing you always get said to after an event was, there's never a cop around when you need one. Of course not. If the cop was around, you wouldn't have needed one. You think about it. Predatory criminals do not commit violent felonies in front of uniformed police officers. They wait till the cop is gone. Once every 7 years is the statistic that a police officer will see a felony committed in his presence. But this issue is so different when you really get into the depth of it. One of the statistics I really love, and very applicable now, when you do the survey research and you ask people, about their gun ownership, and you cross that tab with their self-identified political leanings. There are 10 million Americans that self-identify themselves as liberal that own guns. The National Rifle Association, although it says it's 4 million, right now it might be just at 3. It may go back up to 4 million over the next couple of years. But there are 10 million liberals that own guns, 3-4 times the size of the National Rifle Association. 60 million moderates, self-identified moderates, own guns. 40 million or 30 million conservatives own guns. It's true, the more conservative you self-identify yourself, the more liberal, the more likely you are to be a gun owner. And that's an interesting statistic, but when you look at the broad numbers, 10 million liberals own guns. Why is this issue perceived as a conservative versus liberal issue? It has nothing to do with liberal versus conservative. I jest with people and I say, well, I'm a traditional liberal. Okay, really? Yeah, I believe in the liberal ownership of guns and the liberal use of guns. The two, again, you talk to liberals, you talk to conservatives. You identify the issue involving violent crime and the gun issue, and where is the intersect? It's how do we keep guns out of the hands of people who are already in agreement ought not have them. And we've gone a long way in the last 20 years to doing that with the NICS background check. I think there are a few places where some additional regulation might close a little bit of the problem, but we're always going to have criminals, and we're always going to have those criminals are the most likely people of all to be able to obtain a gun because it's totally inelastic. They need the gun to commit the crime. So when you have that kind of demand, they will find a way to get the gun. But if we as a society are serious about this issue, we won't charge people who buy guns illegally with a crime and then, dismiss it with a $50 fine. If we're serious about an issue in this country, we'll do something about it. I look back 20, 25 years ago, and I'm old enough to remember when Johnny Carson was on TV, and Ed McMahon had come on, and I don't know if he actually was drunk or he just acted inebriated, but we all laughed. It was funny. He'd be kind of stumbling and make fun. Well, that was our mentality in this country, that it was okay to be kind of drunk. It wasn't a good idea to drive drunk, but we weren't serious about the issue until Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. Really, it was a grassroots organization. It came to the fore. It changed the alcohol laws of all 50 states, raising the age from 18 to 21, and we got serious. And as a society, we said, this isn't funny, this is improper behavior, and we made a societal decision that we're not going to tolerate it. And, 25 years ago, if I'd have said, when I'm out with a group of people, well, I'm not going to drink so I can drive, I would have gotten an unbelievable amount of grief from people. Now everybody's thrilled. He's not driving? Good, I can drink, you can drive. And it works. Because, to be honest, I should just mention, in the interest here of honesty, that I am a charter member of DAM, Drinkers Against Mad Mothers. But, if we get serious in this country about an issue, we always can do something about it. We may not completely solve the problem, but we can go a long way to fixing at least the low-hanging fruit problems within an issue. We've never really been serious about criminals and guns in this country. We talk about it, and we do it in such a way that who does it really benefit? It benefits the two sides of the issue, because there's nothing in American politics better than being black or white. There's no middle ground. And of course, as a country, we're a pretty moderate country on almost all issues. We're not 100% this way, 100% that way. We're somewhere in the middle. And often, that's where the truth lies, in the middle. The problem is, how do you become enthusiastic about moderation? I think it's a problem not just on this issue, but on many issues that we face.
One more question.
Yes.
Yeah, good morning. I'd like to thank you also for coming to our College of Law. My question, in light of the recent Supreme Court decision, do you think there will be a renewed push for some type of blanket concealed carry permit that, it's a national permit that's applicable to all states? Or do you think that's a viable option now, or do you think that's not viable?
Well, actually, after 9/11, there was some legislation that was enacted that allows any current or former police officer that maintains their training to carry their firearm not in interstate commerce, but when they're over their state lines. So we've already taken a step in that direction. I think you've identified one of the gun issues that may yet be before, if not this Congress, the next Congress. Last week I was down at the big firearm industry show, the SHOT Show, in Orlando, and now people came over to me and are all saying, when's the next shoe, when's the shoe going to drop? When's all this gun control going to come down the pike? Because they've heard so much over the course of the last year that Obama is this anti-gun president. And, you know, I don't know exactly where he is, but it seems to me that he has some real problems on his plate, the economy, the war, that the gun issue kind of is somewhere so far down the list. And what I've said to them is, if the current administration decides that this being in power really stinks, we'd rather be the minority party, my suggestion to them would be take up a couple of the gun issues and really promote the heck out of them. And if Harry Reid says, I don't really like being in the U.S. Senate, this being majority leader, it's much more than it's cracked up to be, he'll let all sorts of gun bills out. He will find himself as a former United States Senator so fast in the next election, he really won't know what happened. Now, I think what a lot of the Democratic National Party did back in '94 was stupid, but I think they've learned from the experience. This is the third rail of American politics, and whether they agree with many of the policy issues we've touched upon today and the way to articulate them, which almost all of these issues can be articulated from a pro-gun perspective. I can get very pro-gun people to agree with most of the policy issues that I could talk about. But if you articulate that same issue from an anti-gun perspective, you will get lots of opposition. So a lot is the way you approach. It's no different than in a courtroom. If you approach the issue from the correct perspective, and of course, people who are anti-gun almost exclusively don't own guns. Well, people who don't own guns don't care that much about guns. People that own them tend to care quite a bit about them. That's what seems to also confound politicians, is they'll do some opinion poll that'll say 70% of the people support closing the gun show loophole. And then they try and do it, and they find they lose the next election. What they don't understand is the 30% of the people who oppose that have just all come out to vote against them. And the 70% of the people that said they supported it, because they don't know what they're talking about, aren't voting for or against them on the basis of this issue. Again, that's what gives a single-issue group, potentially a well-organized, well-funded, single-issue group, tremendous clout. That's the American system. Am I against it? No. The way you don't oppose it, you kind of fight fire. I used to say you fight fire with napalm. If you want to go in there and do something, don't articulate it from the losing side. Articulate that same issue from a winning perspective. It's much harder to fight from the right perspective. That's something the other side has never done. And I mean, I certainly went through an epiphany on the Brady Bill. I led the NRA's fight against the Brady Bill in the late 80s, early 90s. And when I took over the Industries Trade Association, after a year, what we didn't like about the bill initially was the waiting period. But the background check, I started thinking about it and going, you know, this background check, if it works correctly, and back then at the beginning of computer era was an issue, but if it worked correctly, this isn't a bad idea. In fact, it protected all the licensed dealers that could, in those states, which are most states, that didn't back then have any background check or any license. You walk into a gun shop, you buy a handgun, basically showed your driver's license, but you can have a driver's license, valid license, and have been released from state's prison, having served 20 years, and released earlier in the week and have a valid driver's license. There's no way my dealer would know that this person's a prohibited class individual. Now, let's go back to Virginia Tech. He sold the gun to Cho. He ran the background check on Cho, and Cho came out clean. That was a problem with the mental history records check, which has been fixed now in the system. A guy like Cho could not buy a gun lawfully in Virginia or any other state in this country. I'm not saying he never would have obtained a gun, but I am telling you he wouldn't today have obtained the gun he did. He might have done something worse at a different time or different at a later time, but he wouldn't have gotten that gun at that time. And when I represented the industry, I started to see that, there's a great benefit to this. Where I differed with NRA is their great benefit was in fighting it. It really didn't matter as much what the policy was, and there were some legitimate policy reasons to be concerned, but they were great fundraisers for year after year after year. Dear fellow NRA member, make no mistake, your gun rights are directly on the line. If this bill were to pass, your cherished Second Amendment rights will dim, perhaps forever. Please send $29.52 immediately. It's all about fundraising as much as it's about the issue. And representing an industry, our due structure was I didn't send out fundraising letters. When you represent an industry, you're looking at keeping an industry in business. Well, the business NRA has got as a business is keeping people very worried about their Second Amendment rights. So it's a different orientation, which sometimes leads to a very different conclusion at how you operationalize what you do and what your real game plan is. Well, I'd like to thank the Dean and Jeffrey. I'd like to thank all of you for bringing me here today and listening to what I had to say. Thank you very much. I'm not going anywhere for a while, so if anybody has any more questions, I'd be happy to discuss them with you up front here. Thanks again.
Just a small sentiment of our appreciation, and thank you all for coming. Be sure to grab a drink on your way out.